Hello and welcome to the Accuro EMR Optimization for Cancer Screening training. This video is part of training module number 2 and the topic is using searches for cancer screening. The objectives of this training video are to help Accuro users understand the purpose of searches and how they work, and learn how to translate cancer screening guidelines into search criteria. To start us off, I'd like to put this training in the context of a typical cancer screening workflow. Searches are a tool that can be used for population-based screening. This means that on a regular basis, maybe every 6 months, your practice will make a proactive push to identify all patients who are due for screening, review the list to assess each patient's screening needs, and contact everyone on the list to encourage screening. So how can searches help us do this work? Well, searches are a means of identifying patients according to a set of defined criteria, that first step in the workflow. The search will look through the records of all patients in your practice and will produce a list of just the patients that meet those criteria. That list can then be reviewed by a clinician to ensure the right patients have been identified. To create a search, you separate each line of criteria with Boolean operators and an OR. You'll use AND when two lines of criteria must both be true. So for example, if you're looking for patients who need a mammogram, you'll need to look for patients who are both female and under the age of 75. You'll use OR when only one of two lines has to be true. So for example, if you're looking for patients who may be at high risk for breast cancer, those patients could either have a gene mutation that increases their cancer risk or have a first-degree relative with a gene mutation. Either of those may put the patient at a high risk, but you don't need to have both. So how do you establish criteria for a search? Well, it's helpful to first understand how the criteria will function. Essentially, every line of criteria in an Accuro search will be composed of two basic parts. The first part tells the system where to look in the patient's chart. In this example, document type is a specific field under the document category in the patient's profile. The search is going to look in this field for every patient to find a record. The second part of the search criteria tells the system what to look for. This is basically the rules of the search. In this case, we're looking for patients with a mammogram within the last year. So now, if we make this line of criteria an exclusion, the system will be looking in the document type field of each patient for a mammogram and including these patients in the search result if they have no record within the last year. If a patient does have a record of a mammogram within the last year, that patient will be excluded from the search results. This is important to understand. If you recall from the last training module on data discipline, if you have entered a mammogram record under a different name or in a different category, this line of criteria will not find the patient's record. That patient would then be included in your search results, even though she may not be due for screening. Here we've provided a few more examples of search criteria that you may wish to use in your cancer screening searches. As we've demonstrated, every line of criteria is always made up of two parts, where to look and what to look for. The where is always a specific location in the EMR, and the text you see is the specific name of a field under a specific category. Sex is a defined field under demographics. Family history is a specific field in the patient profile. The what to look for always defines the rules of the search. This is telling you what data you wish to include in your search results. In the first line, we will only include patients whose sex is defined as female. In the third line, we are only including patients who have a record of a Pap test in the last 3 years. Next in understanding how criteria works is to take a look at inclusion criteria versus exclusion criteria. In Accuro, the way that a search identifies people that need to be screened is by finding people that have already been screened and excluding them from the search results. In this example, our inclusion criteria would be sex equals female. This means that patients that are female will be included in the search results. Next, we add a second piece of criteria, which looks in the document type field for a mammogram with a review date in the last 1 year. Since this is an exclusion criteria, all patients that have had a mammogram in the last year will be excluded from the search results. This will leave you with a list of patients that have either never had a screening test performed or have previously had the screening test done but are due for their next one. So now that we've covered how search criteria works, the next step is to figure out what we want our criteria to be based on. For this, we look to Cancer Care Ontario's screening guidelines and recommendations. In this example, we will create a search to find patients who are at average risk for breast cancer. The search will be intended to find those patients who are due for a mammogram. In our first box, we've listed the clinical guidelines for average risk breast screening. In the second box, you can see that the data for these criteria may be found in distinct areas of the patient chart. Age and sex information are found in the patient demographics. Records of mammograms can be found in the documents or lab sections. And patient and family medical history may be found in the fields within the cumulative patient profile. Once you have an idea where you will search for the data, the last box illustrates how you can define the rules of what you will be searching for. So in the age and sex fields, you're looking for patients 50 to 74 years old and female. In the documents or lab sections, you're looking for a mammogram result in the last 2 years and making this an exclusion criteria. In the cumulative patient profile, you're looking to exclude patients with factors that may make them high risk, like personal diagnosis of breast cancer or a family history of breast cancer or a record of a gene mutation. That takes us to the end of this training video. The next video in this module will show you a real demonstration of how to create and run a search in the Accuro EMR. For in-depth detail on creating and running searches, please refer to Section 1 of the Accuro EMR Optimization Guide. We also have short tip sheets on how to build sample searches for breast, cervical, and colorectal cancer screening, as well as a summary of Cancer Care Ontario's screening guidelines and recommendations. Before you move on, please take a moment to complete the short quiz on this page that will test what you've learned in this module.